The silence wasn't declared, it simply happened. 1 second, the Council's central relay stations flickered with human traffic. Encryption-heavy communiques, diplomatic half-pleas, warning signals, even the occasional bitter joke from some Earth envoy who thought he still had time to change things. Then, nothing. Not static, not noise. Nothing. Fleet Commander Dravorn, a 7-limbed Elskari from the Diplomatic Corps, stood in front of a frozen holoscreen on the central spire of Council Prime. His mandibles twitched, confused. Human channels had always buzzed with defiance, even during sanctions, embargoes, even after Earth's seat on the Council had been suspended. Especially then. Earth never shut up. It barked, it roared, it warned. But now, silence. "They're just rerouting," someone muttered. "They're not," Dravorn replied, voice low. "Every relay shut at once. No backdoors, no echoes, not even pirate bands." For a species that was considered young, humans had learned very quickly how to make themselves indispensable. Communications, security systems, jumpgate threading protocols, energy shielding configurations. The Council let it happen, so long as Earth stayed within the leash. Now the leash was lying in pieces, and the dog had walked off into the woods. Lieutenant Marson Graves stood at the edge of the asteroid belt, onboard NRS Vindicator, staring out at the sea of black ahead. He wasn't supposed to be here. No humans were. The Council had labeled Earth a temporary security threat, effectively grounding the species on their own blue rock like they were children who talked back one too many times. Marson didn't feel grounded. He felt unchained. The broadcast had gone out an hour ago, just 4 words. "We are closing everything. No follow-up, no confirmation, just a flip of the switch." And then Earth was gone. Graves lit a cigarette. He wasn't supposed to smoke on deck, but the captain wasn't there to stop him. Nobody was. Everyone else had scattered the moment Earth closed. Half of the Allied ships ditched formation and warped to neutral zones. The other half were trying to call systems that no longer existed. He took a long drag, eyes scanning the black silence. He didn't smile. Because this wasn't a victory, not yet. It was a warning. Back on Council Prime, High Arbiter Velshita, whose people once colonized galaxies with a wave of their claws, slammed her long, spindled hands into the glass table. "You fools!" she hissed at the chamber. "You should have let them speak!" "They were out of control," barked Minister Thraxon, the same man who pushed for Earth's removal from the Council 2 years ago. "They hacked into relay networks, bullied weaker species, refused protocol. They were human," Velshita interrupted, "which is exactly what you signed up for when you invited them in." No one replied. She turned and activated the diplomatic logs. They still had access to one last thing. Earth's final Council message, 3 weeks before the blackout. She played it. The human ambassador's face filled the room, worn, tired, unshaven. A man not built for politics but thrown into it by necessity. His words were simple. "We offered alliance. You demanded obedience. You wanted loyalty, but only on your terms. We warned you. Now we're done talking." He leaned forward, eyes dark and unwavering. "You think silence is surrender? You'll learn otherwise." Marson watched the Council's emergency channel blink into life. Every major race was on it, broadcasting questions, panic, threats, half-pleas. Nobody was responding. Not Earth, not Luna, not Titan, not the outer colonies, not the Black Ops crews stationed behind Council tech hubs, not the rogue captains who once danced on the edge of legality, and definitely not NRS Vindicator. Marson leaned forward, voice steady. "Deactivate all beacons. Cut our IFF tags. Engage blackout." The ship's AI hesitated. He repeated, firmer. This isn't a negotiation. This is the silence. The lights dimmed. Communication systems dropped into stealth mode. And Marson knew, across every star system, every human outpost, every colony ship, every battlecruiser cloaked in some forgotten debris field, others were doing the same. Not running, not hiding. Waiting, because Earth hadn't surrendered. It had withdrawn its voice to sharpen its knives. He hadn't slept in 3 days. Maybe more. Admiral Bennett paced the cold deck of the underground control bunker in Greenland, far below what used to be a NATO listening post. Now it was Earth's primary deep-core command hub, completely off-grid, shielded and so classified even half the global defense parliament didn't know it existed. That was the plan from the beginning. Build like you're preparing for peace. Hide like you're expecting betrayal. He paused in front of the wall-length screen, which no longer showed the Council's encryption-locked diplomatic maps. Just one sentence glowed on the black background. All channels closed. The silence wasn't just a defensive move. It was a statement. And in the highest war rooms of Earth's military complex, that statement was being read loud and clear. They didn't need to say it out loud. We're done begging for a seat at a table built to control us. 3 months ago, Earth had tried to compromise. That memory hit Bennett like a gut punch. The talks on Garanth 9 had been the last straw. Earth's envoys came with peace, modest terms, proposals for shared security structures, trade renewal, and mutual respect, the usual bureaucratic niceties. But that wasn't what the Council wanted. They wanted submission. He still remembered sitting in that sterile silver room, flanked by 2 Council guards in ceremonial armor, watching Earth's ambassador, Adric Sloan, have his voice sliced down by a dozen smug alien politicians who spoke in polite threats and veiled dominance. Sloan had leaned over and whispered to Bennett on the way out. They're not negotiating. They're warning us. They're preparing for something. Bennett hadn't believed it at the time. He did now. Sloan was dead, of course, disappeared mid-return flight. No wreckage, no distress call, no trace. The Council called it a navigational mishap. Earth called it murder. They buried the investigation, but they didn't forget. And when Marson Graves sent word from the outer belt confirming every relay was shut simultaneously, Bennett knew. The plan had begun. Silent, cold, irreversible. The silence wasn't the beginning of war. It was the signal they were done trusting anyone else with the volume. Out past the rim, where old mining colonies clung to dead rocks and pirate crews carved out empires in lawless voids, something strange was happening. The humans were disappearing, but not dying. In the Arkan expanse, 6 freighters bearing Earth's registry vanished off the charts, only to be seen again 3 weeks later in full combat retrofit, no longer answering to the Galactic Merchant Council, but operating under private status Terran sovereign authority. A new designation. Unrecognized. Illegal. But they were armed now. Silent. Daring anyone to stop them. In the TRAPPIST-7 corridor, half the Council's patrol drones shut down overnight after firmware updates written by Terran techs months earlier activated dormant protocols. No explosions, no open threats, just systems collapsing, quietly, strategically, and always. Only the Council's systems. The galaxy didn't understand it yet. They still thought Earth was in retreat. They didn't know what Earth had learned from them. Centuries of watching empires control trade through diplomacy and force, observing how the Council manipulated lesser species into economic dependence and security agreements that were really chains. Humanity had played polite for too long, but not anymore. And the silence? It wasn't a shield. It was a blade. Marson Graves watched the civilian side of the blackout unfold from his private terminal onboard NRS Vindicator. There was chaos. Of course there was. Thousands of human merchants stranded in neutral sectors, Earth-aligned diplomats recalled and detained on suspicion of espionage. Half of Earth's student exchange population rounded up by council members under emergency security protocols. They didn't even bother with trials. And the rest of the galaxy watched like it didn't know what was coming. Even Marson's brother, Lucian, was caught off-world when it happened. He'd always been the idealist, the kind of man who still believed in unity. He taught xenolinguistics at the Council Academy on Telnor Prime. Loved by his students, trusted by the Council. Marson hadn't spoken to him since the blackout began. Communications to Telnor were frozen, and Earth had ordered a total lockdown on outgoing attempts. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message he got before the feeds went dark. Just 3 lines. "They know I'm your brother. I'm being watched. Don't respond. Whatever you're planning, do it fast." That was 3 weeks ago. Marson had read it every night since, not out of guilt, out of clarity, because for all the strategy and stealth Earth deployed, this wasn't just politics anymore. This was personal. The Council wasn't just suppressing a species. They were dismantling a civilization. And if Earth was going down, it was damn sure dragging the whole structure with it. High Arbiter Velshita stood before the Council's fractured delegates, her voice breaking with rare fury. "They warned us," she said. "Over and over, they warned us." Around her, the chamber flickered with denial, arrogance, and just enough fear to thicken the air like smoke. "Humanity has closed all outer communications," she continued. "They've pulled every specialist, every technician, every operative embedded across our security infrastructure. They've sabotaged 23 Council protocols we didn't even know they had access to." Thraxon scoffed. "So we punish them, destroy their satellites, seize their embassies, occupy their—" "You're not listening!" Velshita snapped. A heavy silence. One of the younger diplomats, a soft-spoken Airten scholar, asked the room, "What do they want?" That was the question. Nobody knew. And that terrified them more than any fleet, because war had rules. But silence? Silence could be anything. Down in a sealed vault beneath the Siberian wastes, Earth's last surviving black budget A, I was awake again. It had no name, just a directive, locked behind a chain of approvals never meant to be triggered. It had been dormant since the end of the Rogue Protocol Wars, when humanity promised the galaxy it would never again weaponize self-learning war software. But promises meant nothing to corpses, and Earth was done making nice. Now the AI sat linked to thousands of fail-safes, each one built into Council-controlled systems, agricultural networks, planetary defense shields, jump-gate arrays, all upgraded by Terran engineering over the last 50 years. All waiting. The AI's first signal pulsed quietly, pinging human ships scattered across deep space. Await command. Not attack, not destroy, just one command. Begin silence, Phase 2. And across the void, those who knew what that meant, Terran captains, ground teams, embedded engineers, started moving. No noise, no banners, just quiet preparation, the kind that made empires tremble. Marson leaned against the hull of the Vindicator, watching the light of a Council patrol fleet approach from the edge of the sector. He knew their playbook. Investigate, threaten, offer diplomatic mercy, scan the systems, try to intimidate. But Earth wasn't broadcasting anymore. They weren't explaining, negotiating, or pleading. They were letting the galaxy squirm. He tapped the side of his helmet. "Send ghost signal," he ordered. "No voice, just coordinates." The crew hesitated. Coordinates for what? He stared at the map. Coordinates pointed to the remnants of Outpost 47, a mining station the Council destroyed 2 years ago after claiming it was a weapons site. No warning, no survivors. His voice was ice. Coordinates for memory. The signal was sent, and as the Council fleet received it and slowed to a crawl, confused and unsettled, Marson whispered to no one in particular, "This is what it feels like when the unheard get tired of talking." Lucien Graves stood in the middle of an interrogation room, lit by a single ceiling light. His hands shackled in front of him, blood dried under one eye where they'd struck him. Sloppily, like amateurs. He hadn't spoken since they dragged him from his apartment on Telnor Prime 3 days ago. The guards hadn't even bothered with subtlety. A council patrol, no warrant, no diplomatic pretense. They knew who he was, not just a teacher, not just a linguist, a Graves, and that meant something now. "Your brother is a war criminal," the interrogator snapped. The creature resembled something between a reptile and a spine with teeth. A Sendari intelligence officer, sharp and cruel. Lucien didn't flinch. "You don't know my brother. I know he's on a stealth ship in restricted space. I know he's refusing direct contact with Council patrols. And I know Earth is preparing something that looks a lot like war." Lucien looked up, eyes half dead. "You're wrong." The Sendari leaned closer, confident. "Oh?" Lucien's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's not war. It's punishment." Meanwhile, Marson stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, running scans of the Council ships still patrolling the fringe. They weren't brave. Not really. They were rattled. Moving slower. Communications fragmented. Half of them weren't even talking to each other. And he knew why. Every human blackout signal had triggered more than silence. It had triggered doubt, internally, externally, across every part of the Council's brittle political spine. Marson had seen the data coming in from various Terran silent fleets. Entire trade routes had collapsed. Terraforming operations were stalled. Civil unrest was breaking out on multiple colony worlds. The galaxy wasn't being attacked. It was being abandoned. And in a system built on control, abandonment was the deadliest threat of all. Still, Earth wasn't moving openly yet. It was waiting, watching, letting the Council crumble on its own fear. It was efficient, surgical. But not everyone on Earth wanted slow retribution. Some still wanted blood. In the underground command post beneath the Rocky Mountains, a man who had once been called a moderate now sat quietly in front of a wall of satellite feeds and digital sabotage reports. Director Abram Kane hadn't spoken publicly since Earth initiated blackout. He didn't have to. His presence in the room meant one thing. Earth was no longer playing defense. Kane had been the architect of the fallback plan known only as Project Hecatoncare, named after the mythical 100-handed giants from Earth's ancient past. A name designed to remind every Terran official that this would not be a war of fleets. It would be a war of reach. Earth's reach. Earth's vengeance. Across over 90 systems, Earth had inserted itself into every operating structure: finance, food, logistics, planetary stabilization. Kane had the codes to them all, and today, for the first time since blackout began, he issued his first directive. "Engage Contingency 9. Technicians looked up, eyes wide. Contingency 9 was simple. No ship moves without Earth's permission, not just human ships. Any ship. Embedded command lines in Council Fleet AI, long dismissed as maintenance coding, now responded. Across sectors, ships began drifting. Power rerouted, navigation froze, comms failed. Half a dozen cruisers rotated helplessly in space, systems unresponsive. Their own engineers couldn't explain it. It was quiet. No destruction. No warning. And Kane watched every second of it from his chair, unmoving. They had laughed at Earth's fear before, called them volatile, unworthy of trust. Now Earth had taken the galaxy's engines and left them stranded in their own skies. Back on Council Prime, the chaos turned feral. Ambassadors screamed across overlapping holograms. Panic was no longer hidden. "They've sabotaged our fleets. They've locked out our jump gates. The human AI is still inside our med systems. They could collapse entire planets." No one was listening, because beneath the panic was a deeper, colder fear. What if the humans never planned to win? What if they just planned to ruin everything? Velshita stood at the far end of the war hall, watching the entire political machine shake apart. Her voice was gone. Her warnings ignored. She remembered how it started. One vote. Just one vote to suspend Earth's council seat over disruptive behavior. One vote that triggered 1,000 consequences. But the council hadn't feared Earth. Not then. They had viewed them as aggressive children with loud weapons and no subtlety. They never understood the truth. Earth had been patient, and now silence spoke where words had failed. Lucian was transferred to an underground holding facility, a concrete box beneath the Council's defense headquarters on Telnor. They didn't announce it. There was no hearing. But something had changed. The guards were tenser, the routines sloppier. Even his food was arriving late. He knew that pattern. He had studied alien state behavior for 2 decades. It meant the system itself was under pressure. The council wasn't breaking. It was rotting. One of the guards, the younger one, slipped him a comm piece in secret. "I shouldn't be doing this," the boy muttered, eyes darting. "Why are you?" Lucian asked, voice cracked. The guard hesitated. "Because we just got word. The Earth satellites over Vrosh 3 turned off the entire defense grid there. Just like that, and—" He swallowed. "My family's on Vrosh." Lucian took the comm device slowly. That was Earth's reach. No battles, just pressure. And if a guard on Telnor was ready to betray the Council over one satellite, what was happening elsewhere? Out in the Corral Divide, a forgotten system once used as a Council refueling depot, a small group of human engineers emerged from hiding. They had been there for years. No badges, no ships, just embedded into the infrastructure. They activated a node beneath the planet's core. It had been placed long ago during construction, another silent failsafe. Above them, a Council outpost went dark. No lights, no shields, no oxygen, just stillness. And then came the message, broadcast through static onto emergency channels. "You should have listened when we whispered." Marson got the notification on board the Vindicator. Carroll Divide, silent. Vrosh 3 offline. Telnor civilian systems, reduced to 20%. And every report contained the same code marker. Project Hecaton Care authorized signal detected. It had begun. But Marson felt no triumph, only dread. Because deep down, he knew the Council would not go quietly. Pride was a dangerous thing, and desperate men made reckless choices. On Council Prime, Minister Thraxon convened a covert meeting. A war plan, an actual war plan. "If Earth thinks we'll let them sabotage our infrastructure without retaliation," he growled, "then they are more foolish than I imagined." He outlined a target list. Human colonies near the neutral zone, known Terran-aligned species, high-risk defectors. Velshta watched in horror. "You'll spark something you cannot stop," she warned. But Thraxon sneered. It's already started. Now we make sure they pay the price. The plan was accepted. 10 fleets dispatched. Orders, no negotiation. Containment through annihilation. And just like that, Earth's silence ended. But not because they spoke. Because the galaxy made the mistake of thinking they could still win. Marson received the data burst from Earth's command seconds after the first Council fleet moved. He scanned it twice, unsure he believed what he saw. Are these coordinates correct? His second-in-command nodded grimly. Confirmed. 10 Council fleets, moving fast, multiple colonies in range. Marson didn't respond immediately. Then he whispered, "It's time!" The blackout was over. The silence had served its purpose. Now came the noise. He turned to the crew. Arm weapons. Full alert. Broadcast human frequency. The lights shifted red. The Vindicator's power core surged. Marson stared into the stars. They wanted to hear from us again. Let's give them something they'll never forget. The first Council fleet to strike never saw it coming. They jumped into the outer system of Zoral's Reach, expecting an unarmed settlement of human colonists clinging to old infrastructure. The last planetary scan had shown no active defense grid, no warships in orbit, and 0 registered military personnel. They expected protest. They got an ambush. As soon as the fleet translated out of subspace, every one of their navigation systems failed. Entire ships veered off course, mid-flight formations broke apart, and auxiliary power drained into static feedback loops. Before they could react, hundreds of orbital defense drones rose from beneath the planet's surface, previously disguised as mining rigs and abandoned satellites. No warnings, no questions, just fire. Within 36 seconds, the entire vanguard was vaporized. A human transmission played across all open Council channels. Your orders were annihilation. We simply answered them. The remaining ships tried to retreat. They didn't make it. Zoral's Reach was never undefended. It was bait. Marson Graves stood with his arms behind his back, watching the orbital displays above the Vindicator. The feeds played in real time as the enemy fleets moved, like insects swarming around light sources they didn't understand. He didn't smile. Not once. They're going to double down, he said. They don't know how to do anything else. Beside him, Commander Arlen, older, more battle-hardened, grunted. Pride is the deadliest system in the Council's fleet. Marson didn't answer. His mind was already several steps ahead. Because this wasn't just war. This was justice disguised as cold strategy. After what they'd done to Audric Sloan, after what they did to Lucian. He clenched his fists. No one was coming to save Earth. So Earth stopped waiting and built its own retribution. And now it was rolling across the stars. Back on Council Prime, silence finally ended. But it wasn't human silence. It was the silence of fear choking every breath in the Grand Assembly. Reports poured in. Zoral's Reach, fleet annihilated. Orion Gate, sabotaged. Cryon 5, human-aligned locals uprising. Garinth 9, human diplomats vanished, then reappeared leading a covert resistance force inside the Council's own planetary defense center. But none of that shook them like the last report. They've activated Phase 3. Velshita knew what that meant. Humanity's final card, something whispered about in dark intelligence circles, something even her species, old and proud, had once warned against. The deep seed protocols. Over the past century, human engineers had quietly embedded recursive AI seeds into the infrastructure of nearly every Council-controlled star system, disguised as diagnostic software, energy regulators, or quantum maintenance programs. Now they were waking up, every single one. In one synchronized burst, human AIs took control of over 40% of galactic shipping routes, more than 60 planetary shield systems, hundreds of minor AI networks controlling trade, food distribution, and even environmental systems on Council homeworlds. And they weren't crashing systems. They were reprogramming them, not to destroy, but to redirect. Resources were drained, shield power rerouted to human enclaves. Defense satellites turned away from Earthward targets and began aiming at the Council's own fleets. It was elegant. It was brutal. It was war through strangulation. And it was working. Lucian Graves sat alone in the corner of his cell as the lights flickered above. His wrists were bruised, his mind numb. But even here, beneath Council HQ on Telnor Prime, he felt it. The air had changed. Even the guards stopped threatening him. They didn't yell. They didn't hit. They waited. Because somewhere above them, the foundation was cracking. A soft clink echoed near the door. A small package slid beneath it. He hesitated, then opened it. A datapad. No message, just a single blinking icon. He touched it. The screen showed him an image, Earth's crest, and then coordinates. Extraction in 9 minutes. Lucian stared, confused. No names, no voices. But that was Earth now. It didn't need to speak. It just moved. And when it moved, it didn't miss. In orbit above Telnor Prime, 3 human stealth ships decloaked simultaneously, each one built using hybrid tech the Council had never seen. Sleek, efficient, and terrifyingly quiet. The largest, NRS Phantom, locked onto the planetary defense grid. Its captain spoke only once. "Trigger blackout net. Pull the doctor." The ship launched a series of pulses downward. In under 4 seconds, Telnor's entire surface surveillance went offline. Security grids froze. Alarms failed. Inside the detention center, Lucian's cell door snapped open. A man in matte black armor entered without a word, pulled Lucian to his feet, and handed him a breathing mask. They moved fast. Not stealthily, just fearlessly, because no one could stop them. Not anymore. On the bridge of the Vindicator, Marson watched the operation unfold in real time. "Lucian's clear," Arlen reported. "Confirmed extract, no casualties." Marson nodded slowly. He could feel it now. The shift in power. It wasn't just vengeance. It wasn't even retaliation anymore. This was the reversal. The galaxy had spent generations treating Earth like a wild card, a dangerous, uncultured infant too stubborn to bend. But they forgot what Earth was made of. Steel, blood, memory, and silence that cuts deeper than any declaration. Now Earth was teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget, and it wasn't done yet. On Council Prime, Minister Thraxon stared at the report with trembling hands. They'd lost 5 more fleets. The infrastructure was failing. Planetary economies were nosediving. His own homeworld, Ulanteth, reported food riots for the first time in over 600 years. And worst of all, people were siding with Earth, because Earth had never promised peace. It had only ever promised honesty. Rough, angry, but real, the Council had promised order and delivered chains. Now, even some of their own were turning, factions inside the Council breaking away, sending coded requests to Earth for asylum, surrender, alignment. The fear had shifted. No one feared Earth's weapons anymore. They feared its silence, because it meant the humans were planning something worse than war. They were planning dominion. Marson finally spoke directly to the Council. For the first time since the blackout, a Terran frequency entered the galactic diplomatic relay. No encryption, no guards, just his voice. Calm, cold, measured. "This is Captain Marson Graves of the Terran Sovereign Authority. You've mistaken silence for weakness. That ends now." He paused. "Your fleets are broken. Your systems are infected. Your colonies are revolting. Your civilians are starving." Another pause. "We offered peace. You mocked it. We offered cooperation. You poisoned it. You ordered our death. We responded with control." He leaned forward into the feed. "And now we make it simple." The next words were like iron. "You disband the council, or we disassemble your galaxy." Then silence. But this time the council didn't laugh, because every second of that silence felt like a countdown. And somewhere on Earth, in a bunker layered beneath a dead mountain, Director Abram Kane watched it all. A thin smile cracked his face for the first time in years. Phase 4 was ready. The council didn't know it yet. But the silence? That was mercy. And mercy had just expired. It started with whispers. Not from humans. From the species the council had once ruled, once patronized, once silenced. The ones who'd never been granted a seat at the table but were expected to obey its laws. The ones who watched Earth fall and now watched Earth rise. Suddenly they weren't whispering about rebellion. They were whispering about alliance. And that terrified the council more than every drone, every blackout, every silenced fleet. Because the galaxy had begun to ask itself a question it had never dared voice before. What if the humans were right? Council Prime's war chamber was unrecognizable. Gone were the polished crystal walls and proud heraldry of every founding race. Now it was flooded with flickering emergency lights, scattered debris, and diplomats arguing over whose worlds had fallen next. Minister Thraxon was yelling again. He hadn't stopped for days. "Our satellites on Velrix went dark this morning. 2 hours later, every food distribution route on the southern hemisphere was rerouted to a human-occupied relay system. They're starving my people." Across from him, Velshita didn't even blink. "Then surrender." Thraxon stared, mouth half open. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," she said flatly. "You want food? You want control back? Go to Earth. Sign their terms. Accept their authority. Because this isn't about war anymore, Thraxon." She looked around the room, half of them trembling, half avoiding her eyes. "This is about survival, and you already lost the war the moment you ignored their first warning." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was shameful. Because somewhere in the deep gut of their collapsing empire, they knew she was right. They had pushed too far, too long, against the one species that never forgot a betrayal. Marson Graves stood on the deck of Vindicator, now docked inside Earth's newly operational orbital station. Bastion 1. The station had been hidden in the shadow of Saturn for years, buried behind layers of electronic masking and asteroid dust. A ghost in the dark. Now it glowed with purpose. Human engineers ran drills along the outer ring. New AI-controlled rail batteries lined its spine. And in the command deck, the Sovereign Authority was holding its first summit. Not on Earth. Not in any known embassy. But here, in a place the Council didn't even know existed until a week ago. Marson adjusted his collar as he stepped into the summit room. It was simple, steel-plated, with no grand designs. Just chairs, charts, orders. At the head of the table sat Abram Kane. And he looked exactly the same as he had a decade ago. Calm, rigid, barely human anymore. "Phase 4 begins today," Kane said without preamble. Marson raised a brow. "We're moving that fast?" "It's time," Kane said. "The Council is fractured. Their alliances are fraying. We don't need to destroy them now." He looked at the screen behind him. It lit up with dozens of alien planets blinking red. "We just need to let them collapse." Lucian Graves hadn't expected to see Earth again. When they dropped him onto a hidden landing pad in Iceland, far from the media, far from the cities, he just stood there, eyes squinting against the gray sky, feeling like he'd been dropped into a dream. No more interrogators, no more lies, no more chains, only cold air and silence. He found Marson in a dim hallway under Bastion 1 days later. The reunion was quiet. They didn't hug, they didn't speak at first. They just stood there. Two brothers, changed by two very different wars. "I saw what they did," Lucian said eventually. "I know," Marson replied. Lucian turned to him. "You didn't have to go this far." Marson's jaw tightened. "Yes, I did." Lucian stepped closer. "You think you're fixing things, but all you're doing is replacing one tyranny with another." Marson stared at him. "Difference is, ours won't lie about it." The silence that followed wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hate either. Just understanding. On the edge of Council space, Earth's influence had started bleeding into sectors no one thought possible. On Kelvarith, a trade hub once loyal to the Council, local leaders ousted their Council-appointed administrator and raised the Terran flag. On Yashar, a planet of peaceful researchers once neutral, AI-guided supply ships began landing with Terran markings, offering food and medicine without demands. And on Arvest 3, an outer mining world ruled by the Sendari elite, the workers revolted after their wages stopped due to Earth's economic chokehold. When the planetary governor tried to call for backup, the Council relay was silent, because Earth had taken it. A video of the miners raising their own charter, modeled after Earth's declaration of sovereignty, went viral across thousands of star systems. They didn't beg for recognition, they declared it, and Earth let them. This wasn't conquest, this was conversion. Abram Kane watched the feeds roll in like a priest counting converts. "The structure falls when belief dies," he said to no one in particular. Marson sat nearby, reviewing deployment patterns. "You think they'll just surrender their power?" he asked. "You think Thraxon and the rest will kneel?" Kane chuckled, low and tired. "Number. But they'll watch everyone else walk away. That's worse." He turned, eyes sharp. "It's not the throne that breaks first. It's the loyalists." Marson didn't argue, because he knew something now, something he hadn't realized at the beginning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reshaping the galaxy into something colder, something unshakable. Not fair, not kind, just honest. And humans were done pretending to be anything else. Back on Council Prime, Thraxon summoned his remaining fleet commanders. Only 5 responded, and none of them had full fleets anymore. He stared at the fractured holomap. "We still have power." One of them shook his head. "Number, we have ships, but power's gone." Another added, "My own officers are defecting. They're uploading Earth's sovereign protocols into our system. I didn't even stop them." Thraxon slammed his fist into the console. "Then kill them." But no one moved. Because the orders no longer meant anything. The Council wasn't feared now. It was pitied. And Marson's words still echoed in their minds. "Disband, or be disassembled." And piece by piece, the disassembling had begun. Velshita stood on her private tower, staring out at the skyline. Smoke curled in the distance from civil riots. Shuttles were fleeing overhead. Trade was dead. Her planet, once one of the most prosperous in Council history, was now reduced to chaos in less than 6 weeks. She didn't blame the humans. She blamed the arrogance that ignored them for too long. When her private terminal buzzed, she already knew what it would be. The message was short. From Terran Authority. Bastion 1. To Velshita, former High Arbiter. We invite you to the first Reconstruction Summit. You no longer speak for the Council. You speak for your people. She stared at the last line for a long time. For your people. Not for the Council, not for politics, not for power. It was harsh, but it was real. She hit accept, and in doing so became the first former council leader to defect publicly to Earth. Within 2 hours, 4 more followed. By the end of the day, 16. Back on Bastion 1, Kane looked up from his terminal. "They're breaking faster than I thought." Marson stood at the window, staring into space. "We never needed to fight them." "No," Kane said. "We just needed them to hear what silence sounds like when it finally answers back." Marson didn't say anything, because he knew the truth. The galaxy wasn't changing because Earth was rising. It was changing because it had finally looked in the mirror and saw Earth staring back. They called it the Summit of Surrender, though no one said the word out loud. In truth, there was no ceremony, no anthem, no formal treaties drawn in ornate halls. It was a metal conference room buried inside Bastion 1, humming with recycled air and tension thicker than gravity. 16 former council delegates sat across from 6 Terran officers, one of whom was Marson Graves. He wasn't wearing medals. He wasn't reading from prepared remarks. He didn't bring flags or fanfare, just facts. Marson stepped forward and tapped the table, projecting a holographic map of the known galaxy. Half the systems blinked red. Another third were marked yellow, neutral but unstable. "Humanity controls the choke points," he said. "Gateways, trade hubs, outer belts. We haven't taken them. We've stopped them. No one moves unless we let them. You already know this." No one interrupted. "These are the terms," Marson continued. "Your homeworlds remain under your jurisdiction, but council law is dissolved. All trade regulation, fleet coordination, and technological standardization now falls under the Terran sovereign authority. You keep your people, we keep the stars." Velshta raised her eyes. "And those who refuse?" Marson didn't blink. "Then they learn the cost of choosing arrogance over survival." Another delegate spoke. "And what do you call this new system? This authority you're building?" Marson exhaled slowly. "We don't call it anything." That was true, because Earth wasn't naming their empire. They were earning it, one silence at a time. Across council space, the last holdouts were breaking under pressure. The Sendari High Fleet attempted to regroup near the scorched moons of Ferrex's wake, only to find every beacon hacked, every fuel line rerouted, every drone network looping on ghost protocols. They were blind, dead in the water. They issued a distress call, something no Sendari commander had ever done in recorded history. Earth never responded. Instead, a simple file was transmitted directly to the High Admiral's neural node. A video. It showed a Sendari cruiser from 2 years ago, blasting a civilian human transport out of the sky during a routine search. The final image was a list of the victims: children, refugees, names Earth never forgot. That cruiser's admiral had retired in peace. Earth didn't believe in peace for people like that. Moments later, the entire Sendari fleet detonated mid-space, one by one, without being fired upon. Internal failure. No escape pods. Earth had flipped a switch, and that was all it took. Lucian stood by the sea, watching the waves roll in against the northern cliffs of Iceland. After everything, the cell, the silence, the rescue, this was the first time he'd allowed himself to breathe. He was free now. Free, but not comfortable. Because while the council had collapsed, the question of what came next wasn't answered. He saw it in the eyes of the people walking past him at the Terran safe zone. Scientists, politicians, refugees from across the galaxy. They weren't here because Earth offered sanctuary. They were here because Earth offered certainty. And certainty, when the rest of the universe was falling apart, felt like salvation, even when it came from steel. Lucian heard footsteps behind him and turned. Marson stood there, silent for a moment, hands in his coat. They're signing the final declaration tomorrow, he said. Lucian didn't reply. Marson looked out at the water. The last 6 member states. After that, there won't be a council left. Lucian studied his brother's face. You think that makes you the good guys? Marson tilted his head. I think it makes us the survivors. Lucian sighed. What about the ones who never fought? The innocents who just wanted peace? Marson's jaw flexed. Then they should have spoken up when Earth begged for the same. Lucien stepped closer, his voice firmer. And if this is what comes after? Total control? No discourse, no alliances, just silence and command. Are we any better than what they were? Marson stared at him. We never claimed to be better, he said. We just promised we wouldn't lose again. Back on Council Prime, Thraxon had vanished. Rumors spread. Some said he'd been arrested by his own military. Others claimed he'd gone underground, seeking vengeance. The truth was worse. Thraxon had made a deal. In the underbelly of the shattered council, among those who refused to surrender, a coalition was forming. Broken species, disgraced leaders, pirates, extremists, fanatics. They called themselves the Reclaimers. Their mission was simple: reverse the blackout, break the Terran grip, restore the old order by any means. And Thraxon, bitter and bleeding, became their prophet. He gathered the last remaining council warships, smuggled old AI weapon caches through collapsed gates, began spreading false messages through neutral systems. Earth was lying, Earth was fragile, Earth could be broken. It was desperation. But it was also dangerous, because for the first time since the silence, someone had dared raise their voice again. Marson saw the reports before anyone else. A colony on Ithar 6 attacked. Dozens dead. A Terran diplomat tortured and executed on a live transmission by Reclaimer insurgents. An old orbital cannon platform, believed to be decommissioned by Earth, reactivated and aimed at Bastion 1. It didn't fire, but that wasn't the point. They wanted to prove something, that Earth could bleed. Marson slammed the report shut and stood. We're going hunting, he told the command staff. One of the officers asked, You think they're organized enough to matter? Marson's voice was cold. They don't have to matter. They just have to make us look weak. And Earth couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Not ever again. Lucian watched as martial protocols swept across neutral zones. Checkpoints were set up, starport permits revoked, AI filters upgraded to lethal enforcement. It was happening again, just with different flags. He brought the data to Kane. These aren't security measures, Lucian said. They're submission codes. Kane didn't even look up. The price of peace is obedience. Lucian slammed the tablet on the desk. Then we're no different. Kane finally met his eyes. You still think this is about good and evil, Lucian. It's not. It's about control. Control is what keeps children from being bombed on colony ships. Control is what keeps food moving and riots down. The Council had it. Then they abused it. Now we have it, and we won't. But what happens when someone dares challenge that control? Lucian asked. What happens when we don't silence them in time? Kane smiled thinly. Then they learn why the galaxy feared us before we went quiet. Lucian walked out of the office that day. He didn't go back. On a dust-blown moon in the Dremora fringe, Thraxon stood before his ragged fleet. You want fear? Good, he barked, because fear is what keeps them guessing. He tapped a command into a rusted console. A transmission pulsed through pirate channels, smugglers, mercenaries, and old Council loyalists. A message burned in red. Earth is not infallible. Join us and make them remember. His lieutenants were skeptical. This will trigger a retaliation, one warned. Thraxon smiled, eyes wild. Let them come. Marson reviewed Thraxon's transmission in silence. Kane stood behind him. "They want a war," Kane said. "We give them one." Marson didn't respond right away. He was watching something on the screen. An old file, a video, one of the first meetings Earth ever had with the Council. He watched how they'd been dismissed, mocked, talked down to. He watched how Earth's ambassador had sat quietly, pleading, trying, and how none of them listened. He shut the feed off. His voice was made of steel. "End the blackout." Kane raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Marson nodded. "If they want our voice again, then let's speak loud enough to bury them." The blackout ended, not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap. At 0600 Terran Universal Time, a single frequency was opened across every known relay, beacon, and diplomatic channel. No encryption, no authorization keys, just one open signal. It carried a broadcast from Bastion 1, transmitted through 1,000,000 voices, screens, and frequencies at once. The face on screen wasn't a diplomat or a politician. It was Marson Graves, scarred, sleepless, and calm in that chilling Terran way. To some across the galaxy, he was a hero. To others, a butcher. To most, a reminder. His voice cut through the universe like a blade. "This is Captain Marson Graves of the Terran Sovereign Authority. The silence is over, and now you will understand what it was hiding." He leaned forward, eyes unblinking. "To those still clinging to the wreckage of the Council, this is not a warning. It's your last chance to become part of what comes next. For those who claim Earth's rule is tyranny, remember this. You had your chance to lead. You used it to lie, to steal, and to kill. You wanted obedience, you got silence, now you get consequences." The feed cut, and the galaxy shook, not from ships or weapons, but because for the first time in history, Earth wasn't asking. On the dark side of Bastion 1, Earth's retaliation fleets deployed in silence. No dramatic music, no speeches. Just cold, clinical execution. Thraxon's reclaimer strongholds were mapped down to their oxygen intake systems. Their comms were poisoned with fake confirmations. Their supply routes traced and corrupted. Human sleeper AIs embedded in abandoned Council satellites activated simultaneously, shutting off reclaimer stealth shielding and redirecting their weapon systems back on themselves. The Dremora stronghold went first. It was supposed to be impenetrable. Hardened bunkers, salvaged planetary cannons, and a half-dozen mercenary fleets. Marson's fleet never fired a shot. Instead, the AI grid collapsed every oxygen recycling unit inside the reclaimer base. Emergency backups kicked in, then failed, then reversed. By the time the reclaimers knew they were suffocating, Bastion 1's gunships had already landed. No prisoners, no negotiations, just reclamation. Thraxon watched the footage from a hidden chamber buried deep under Nithos rock, his last fallback. The look on his face wasn't fear. It was rage. "They're dismantling us like we're rotting systems," he spat. He turned to the table behind him. 8 figures stared back, leaders of fringe colonies, deposed rulers, pirate lords, all of them united under hate. You see what they do? No dialogue, no compromise. Just silence, then domination." One of the older rebels shook his head. "Number, they gave us a choice. You just didn't listen." Thraxon's hand slammed the table. "You coward. You think they'll let you keep your world? They'll gut you once they're done with me." Silence followed. Even his allies were wavering, because they all knew. Earth wasn't acting like an empire. It was acting like an executioner. And Thraxon had put his name on the list. Lucian Graves wasn't surprised by the broadcast. He'd known his brother would break the silence eventually. What did surprise him, though, was the sound of people cheering. On neutral colonies across the fringe, humans and non-humans alike clapped and wept as Marson's voice echoed from towers and transport hubs. Not out of fear, out of relief. Because as harsh as Earth had become, its silence had brought something no one else had been able to enforce. Order. Lucian watched a half-starved child eat bread from a Terran aid drop. He saw an entire street of refugees bow their heads when the banner of the sovereign authority passed overhead. He wasn't blind to the cost. But he couldn't ignore the truth. People didn't want freedom without structure. They wanted structure that didn't lie. And Earth, harsh, scarred, bitter Earth, wasn't lying anymore. Not to itself, not to anyone. Back on Bastion 1, Marson stood in the Situation Room. A map of the galaxy glowed above him. Points flickered green, worlds stabilized, yellow, undecided, red, active resistance. There were only 4 red dots left. Kane entered, hands behind his back. "They've stopped fighting," Kane said. "Even the reclaimers. We're getting surrender packets from half the sector." Marson didn't look up. "Thraxon?" Kane shook his head. "Still hidden. But not for long. Our tracers caught a sequence anomaly on a dead relay near Nithos Rock. We're triangulating." Marson nodded. "Then we finish it." Kane hesitated. "We don't need to kill him," he said. "His people have already lost faith. Public trial, maybe. Make an example." "No," Marson interrupted. "He made his example. Every child burned on those colony ships. Every broken envoy, every Terran diplomat dragged from a consulate and shot in the street. He made his case." Marson's voice turned cold. "Now we make ours." On Nithos Rock, Thraxon's final bunker cracked open under sonic pressure charges. The walls collapsed inward, lights shattered, and black-armored Terran troops flooded in like a wave of night. Thraxon reached for the pulse rifle on his desk, and found nothing. Marson stood in the doorway, weapon already trained. "I was hoping you'd try," he said. Thraxon snarled. "You think this is victory? This is terror. This is silence." Marson stepped forward. "You don't get to speak for silence." He pressed the trigger once. Thraxon's words died with him. The death of Thraxon marked the end of the resistance. In less than 48 hours, every remaining Reclaimer stronghold collapsed. Some surrendered. Some turned on each other. Some self-destructed before Earth even arrived. None escaped. Across the galaxy, old warships powered down. Former Council loyalists deactivated security nodes. Pirate factions erased their sigils and repainted them in black and silver, Earth's new insignia. And for the first time in galactic history, there was no war. Not because peace had been signed, but because no one dared fight anymore. Lucian returned to the summit chamber of Bastion 2 days later. Marson was there, watching the final systems flicker from red to green. "It's over," Lucian said. Marson didn't answer. "You won," Lucian continued, "but at what cost?" Marson's voice was quiet. "They broke us. We rebuilt. That's not conquest." Lucian looked around. "Then what is it?" Marson finally turned to him. "It's control." Lucian didn't argue. He understood now. Earth hadn't risen because it was noble. It had risen because it was willing. Willing to do what the others wouldn't. Willing to say what no one dared. Willing to bleed and remember and answer every betrayal with precision and power. Not for glory, but for certainty. And in a galaxy that had forgotten how to be honest, Earth had reminded them with silence. Then with fury. Back on Earth, Abram Kane stood before the global parliament for the first time since the blackout began. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply spoke. "We were broken, mocked, cast out, but we did not disappear. We waited. We watched. And when the moment came, we acted. Let this galaxy know we did not take this power, we were forced to claim it. No one applauded, but no one objected. Because they all knew Earth had not conquered the stars. It had simply made itself impossible to ignore. And now, the silence was theirs to command. 6 months passed. No wars, no rebellions, no broadcasts demanding change. Only silence. But it wasn't the kind that came from fear or peace. It was the kind that came when the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting to see what Earth would do next. On thousands of planets, both human and alien, black and silver banners hung from towers. The emblem of the Terran sovereign authority had become a symbol not of oppression, but of finality. Deals were no longer debated, they were accepted. Disputes weren't mediated, they were decided. And leadership wasn't elected, it was enforced. Marson Graves became the de facto voice of Earth, not a president, not a king, not even a general anymore, just the man who ended the silence. He never wore a uniform, he never gave fiery speeches, he just issued commands. And the galaxy listened, because Earth didn't ask twice. Lucian Graves walked through the inner districts of Bastion 1, unnoticed by most, not because he was hiding, because the galaxy no longer cared about who you were, only what authority you carried, and Lucian had none. He moved past patrols and checkpoints, past civilians and diplomats, past ambassadors from races that once ruled 10 systems now bowing their heads before human officers. He felt it pressing on his chest, the weight of it all. Order. Total, inescapable order. He stopped in front of a crowd gathered around a hologram projection in the open square. It showed a recording of Marson addressing a fleet of new recruits. Power is not about who speaks the loudest. Power is who everyone listens to when no one else is speaking. The crowd clapped politely. Lucien did not, because he'd realized something these people hadn't. This wasn't victory. It was what came after victory, when the swords are sheathed, but the eyes are still watching. Back on Earth, the Parliament had become ceremonial. All decisions were routed through Kane's office. He didn't smile anymore. He didn't even look tired. He looked mechanical. 3 more systems requesting integration, his aide said. Kane nodded. Assign overseers. Fast-track the economic zones. Prioritize translation of Terran law. He barely blinked. And the dissenters? Who? The scholars on Carthus 7. Wrote a treatise calling us a bureaucratic shadow regime masquerading as a stabilizing force. It's circulating. Kane looked up. Is the planet under authority code? Yes, sir. Then silence the treatise. The aide paused. Erase it? Kane didn't flinch. Number, let it live. But tag every reader. Flag their IDs. Run passive monitoring. The aide nodded, grim. There were no dissidents anymore. Just subjects under observation. In a quiet dome on Luna, Marson sat at a window facing Earth. He hadn't returned to the planet since the blackout ended. He couldn't. Earth had become something he didn't recognize. It was clean, safe, controlled. But in that control, it had lost something. Maybe it had always been gone. A voice buzzed in his comm. Sir, the Valari Pact has voted unanimously to dissolve its internal council and request full Terran alignment. Marson didn't answer. Another voice chimed in. Another voice chimed in. Sir, the neutral station on Ryder's chain has sent a probe with Terran encryption. Unsolicited allegiance request. Still no response. He stared down at the Earth. So small, so quiet. And somewhere in that silence, he wondered if he'd won anything at all. Lucien met Kane one last time. It wasn't in a war room or a summit hall. It was in the ruins of an abandoned council embassy on the outskirts of what used to be called Sector 9. Kane was alone, brushing dust off a broken data console. Lucien stood at the entrance, hands in his pockets. They left everything behind, Lucien said. They had no use for ruins, Kane replied. Lucien stepped forward. We did it, huh? Kane nodded. Yes. Lucien exhaled. So why does it feel like we burned more than we saved? Kane stared at him for a long time, then said, Because you still think justice looks like forgiveness. Lucien shook his head. Number. But I thought justice might at least look human. Kane gestured to the stars above. This. What we've built is human. Raw, ruthless, efficient. We were told we weren't civilized enough. Now they follow our every word. Is that the goal? Lucien asked. To be feared? To be obeyed? No, Kane said. To be remembered. And in that moment, Lucien understood something horrifying. Earth had never wanted to fit in. It wanted to leave a scar. Something so permanent, so unforgettable, that no race in the galaxy would ever risk silence again. Far out on the edge of the known systems, a lone child stood on a dust-colored colony world. He wasn't human. He was born to a species once proud, once noble, now bowing to Terran law. He looked up at the sky as an Earth carrier passed overhead, its engines humming like thunderclouds. Beside him, his father whispered, Those are the ones who silenced the stars. The boy didn't answer. But in his hand, he gripped a scrap of old parchment, a forgotten document from before the blackout, before the silence. It read, Council Charter, Sovereign Races of the Galaxy. The child read the words, then looked up again. Not with hatred, with questions, and that was how it always began. Because silence doesn't last forever. And one day, someone would speak again. But they would speak knowing what Earth had taught them. If you mock a species long enough, if you take enough from it, if you ignore every warning, eventually they will stop talking. And when they do, you'll beg to hear their voice one last time, before it becomes the last sound you ever hear. Back in orbit, Marson Graves stood alone in the chamber where it had all started. No delegates, no brothers, no wars, just the memory of silence. He activated the old diplomatic feed, the one Earth had once used to beg for understanding. It was quiet now. Dead space. But he left it open just in case. Because maybe one day another species would rise. Maybe one day they'd feel what Earth had felt. Maybe they'd cry out, and maybe, if Earth remembered what it meant to be powerless, it would answer. But not today. Today, the galaxy was Terran, and the silence was theirs to command.